Hello, and thank you all for joining us here today for this pre-lunch session. We have an excellent panel to discuss the future of automatic enrolment. I must apologise for the quality of my voice. I have a cold. I'm not normally this husky when talking about pensions, I assure you. But automatic enrolment, now, it's considered one of the biggest policy successes this country has seen in recent times. The last figures to date, more than 6.7 million people have been automatically enrolled into a workplace pension since 2012, involving more than 250,000 employers. That's helped push workplace pension participation to record levels. So all in all, quite a remarkable achievement on the world stage. But it's certainly not time to bring out the balloons and bunting and celebrate just yet, because job far from done. Automatic enrolment is facing some big challenges over the next few years as it rolls out to small and micro employers. Now, there's hundreds of thousands of them. And in addition to that, there are certainly some big questions to be tackled about key issues, including where and how the minimum contribution rates go beyond 8%. What about opt-outs? How can they be kept low? And then there's the issue of how will automatic enrolment remain relevant to a growing workforce that is in unsecure employment and aren't covered by automatic enrolment. If you thought that list was long enough, you can add master trust regulation to that. We've certainly seen some details of that today. Now, master trusts have played a key role in making sure automatic enrolment has worked so far for employers and employees. These multi-employer pension schemes have about 4 million members so far, and that's projected to grow to about 7 million by 2030. So what role could master trusts play in helping tackle the big issues and challenges facing automatic enrolment? It's my pleasure to introduce to you what I call the masters of the master trust universe. Otto Thoresen, Chair of Nest, Emma Douglas, Head of Defined Contribution with L&G, Morten Nilsson, Chief Executive of Now Pensions, and Patrick Heath-Lay, Chief Executive of the People's Pension. Now, this morning we've been madly scrabbling around looking at the details of the pensions bill, and we're going to start with that because it's hot off the press, and regulation is certainly going to be a very, very key issue for the industry and for automatic enrolment and impacting on it. Now, we've had a quick look through the details, and some of the key measures are capital adequacy requirement. There's going to be a new authorisation requirement from the regulator, fit and proper tests. So all in all, what are your thoughts and reactions to the detail that we've seen today? If I can start with you, Otto.
Okay, well, thanks, Jo, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I have to say it's mainly a pleasure to be here because now, finally, my Twitter handle is up there on the screen, I think, and you can see I was born to do this job. My name fits so well in with the auto-enrolment programme. But if I move on to the question, my early sense, and it's a very early sense, Jo, because we've only had a chance to have a quick look, is that the way the bill's been put together is as we might have expected. I don't think that there's anything in there which looks dramatically surprising. But of course, it's very, very short of detail, and that phrase, the devil's in the detail, I don't think applies anywhere more than it applies here. Seems to me that my initial view is, well, I welcome it, clearly. I think it's a few years late, but you know, at least now we're getting on with it, and I think that's extremely positive. There's a lot of work to be done, though, to get it enacted and to make it bite. And sadly, I suspect that'll take most of the time that's left to get the remaining employer staged. So we're going to have this coming in probably just after we've pretty well brought everybody into the system. In terms of the highlights, well, clearly how the capital requirements are defined in detail, how one is able to provide that capital, the sources of that capital, will be a huge issue in terms of the potential it has for disrupting the existing market. I think also, though, the regulatory environment as it applies to significant individuals or trustees or management within the schemes will be potentially just as impactful. Having spent much of my career in the regulated environment of the FSA and its successors, I know what that can feel like, and I think there's a big challenge there in drawing that the right way and in resourcing the pension regulator to be able to support it. I think the only other thing I'd say, because we should get a chance for everybody to contribute, but I would almost send a plea to government. Let's try and use as much of the existing tools that are out there and being used by quality master trusts already to demonstrate the quality of what they're doing. Let's try to use as much of that as possible as we move forward with this, rather than reinventing everything again.
Emma, in a sense, this legislation isn't going to hit hardest the people sitting here. It's really going to hit the tail, which are more worrying. What do you see as the impact, the immediate impact? Do you think there could be quite a messy fallout or shock to the market from this regulation or the rules?
I mean, I think that the regulation is designed to flush out those master trusts that are not going to be capable of operating sensibly going forward. So yes, I think potentially we will see some fallout from this, and there is the intention that we should see some fallout from this. So I think it's most important that it's managed very well, so that there are schemes ready to pick up failing master trusts who decide this authorisation regime is just too much for them, it's not going to work for them going forward, whether commercially or otherwise, and so that we don't see a lot of members stranded, because that's not going to help the overall master trust brand. You know, there has been quite a lot of bad publicity around, you know, the Cowboys Are Us type master trusts. Hopefully this regulation will help to remove some of those from the industry, leave us with the key players going forward. But I do think there is a danger of a bit of a messy fallout unless we come together as an industry and offer that safety net to pick up those members who are going to be moving out of the failing master trusts.
Morten, what are your thoughts on whether what needs to be done before the regulations actually come into force, in addition to consolidation? Does the regulator need to take a more active role in seeking out unstable master trusts and perhaps herding them towards consolidators?
I think the regulator obviously has a very, very big role to play in this, because I think it's key that there's enough resource to examine both the business plans that are out there and the funding properly, so we can start to see an orderly consolidation. And I would just say that there's been quite a lot of debate about that these capital requirements should start out very light, so we are not forcing anyone out of the market by introducing these new rules. And my personal view is that can't be right, because having people who are not sustainable in the market for a longer time might make it even more unsustainable and more bloody when it falls over. So I think one of the points we've been trying to make is that it's really positive with these new capital requirement rules, hopefully when we understand all the detail. But one of the things that definitely should be there is some kind of de minimis capital to be able to take people's hard-earned savings and operate our occupational pension scheme.
And Patrick, what, if anything, can the regulator do to smooth a faster consolidation of the market? At the moment, there are rules about schemes being transferred into other schemes. Is there anything from that perspective that the regulator could do?
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, there's clearly active conversations going on between the regulator and some of these entities. You know, they know where they are, and they obviously understand a lot more about them than I think, you know, we do as a sector. So I think it's important that those conversations are going on, and that, you know, if there's anyone out there, I mean, in a more proactive stance, that looking at what's coming is thinking, actually, our business model isn't going to fit, the quicker we get to conversations between the regulator and that outfit, and then go through an orderly process, the better. Because I think, leading from Morten's point, I think if we get into a disorderly state, I think that's where you'll get crisis. And the outfall of the stories around this don't just affect master trusts, it affects pensions and savings generally. So there's a really important point that we need to come together and support that as well. Going back to the sort of rules, I think that inevitably in doing this, there will be an opportunity, and I'll say it as an opportunity, to look at transfer rules and actually unpick whether current processes are still appropriate. Now, without getting into detail, but there are a lot of rules in terms of lift and dropping. If you're taking an investment mix into another scheme and it's different, is that appropriate for the member? You have to go through a lot of process. I think in some of these circumstances, we're going to actually say those rules have got to drop away, and we've got to be able to lift and drop a scheme in a very simplistic way. So in that way, we might actually have new regulation and new challenge to transfer processes going forward, actually outflowing from this. But I do think there's opportunity both for a regulator in being proactive and in looking at these existing transfer rules, and indeed ourselves in coming together to try and support that process to work in a more proactive way that maybe the system is improved as a result of this.
Of course, it might be at least a year or so before we see these regulations coming into play. And during that period, we've got hundreds of thousands of employers possibly being funneled and going into these shoddy schemes ahead. I mean, how urgent do you think it is that preemptive action needs to be taken to prevent any kind of messiness that blows up and, it turns into a bit of a toxic bomb for the industry?
Yeah, well, clearly I think everybody sitting on this sofa has the reputation of the pension reforms themselves and the success of auto-enrolment as the priority. And I think this is one of the most significant risks to that success. If you'd gone back a few years, I guess the operationalisation of the whole thing would have been seen as a massive potential risk. But I think we've demonstrated across the industry that we can respond well to that. So it's kind of obvious that we must do all we can to minimise the risk. But I have to say, it's quite difficult from the outside, and I mean this is, I say from the outside of the regulatory perspective, to understand where that intervention could be brought to bear and how to bring it to bear. I'm very conscious of the fact that the pension regulator has a very broad agenda at the moment and some very significant other issues that they're trying to grapple with. I just don't know how able they are in the time that we have between now and a year from now. Do
you think the government should step in and perhaps improve the resources of the regulator?
Well, I think Leslie's potentially in the room. I guess she could speak for herself on that.
And all of you sitting here, are you interested in consolidation, in taking on that role? Perhaps you spoke of some industry scheme where you put your hand up and troubled schemes are herded towards you. Is everyone sitting here interested in taking part in that?
Well, for ourselves, yeah. I think it's important that we have an obligation almost to respond to this, because this is designed to have a market impact. It's not accommodating. It is designed to actually make change. So I think it's important for pensions as a whole that we, as much as we can, through our different models, come together, hopefully in some sort of panel format or some way that we can support the work that will be needed to do. Because some of them will be orderly transitions and it will be quite reasonable business, and commercially everyone won't be too worried. And other parts of this will be really horrible, labour intensive and very expensive, not economic to do. So I think it's important that we act in a collective way. So certainly our view will be we would support some sort of panel process.
But also I think that consumers and our members would just be horrified if they knew there was any of this risk, and they would be completely surprised that they are being auto-enrolled into potentially schemes that have no capital and not necessarily competent trustees or whatever. I think they would be really shocked. So I think it's in all our interest to make sure that this is orderly and it's quiet and done well. And we would clearly invest a lot in being able to support that.
I mean, it is quite a big job, I would say, because these master trusts are probably failing for a reason. So it is quite a lot of work to take it into a master trust. Just from what I've seen of the regulations, it is only a master trust to master trust transfer, so you couldn't go into a group personal pension, which is a bit of a barrier, because quite a lot of the insurance companies like ourselves would actually use the group personal pension rather than the master trust for auto-enrolment. So, there are some technical issues that I think we need to look at in more detail, but I would be, very supportive of us as an industry providing that safety net.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll move on to the automatic enrolment review now, because there's plenty to talk about what is going on with the policy at a high level, and next year we have the scheduled review in 2017. It's only, at this point, scheduled to cover nest operations. Much of that has been ticked off with transfers and contribution caps, etc. But what are the panel's thoughts on what should be included in that review? Would you like to start?
There's conversations about adequacy. We might have some slightly different opinion on that, but I think you can't deny we've got uplifts in auto-enrolment contribution rates to come at the end of the staging cycle, and clearly the outcome of those will have some influence on wherever you're going to have your conversations around adequacy. You know, I mean, even if you have them in 2017, you will be influenced by what you see happening in 18-19 with the anticipated rate rises. And actually, I think, just as a general comment on that, I think they are open to some political interference. I mean, you know, a rate increase that's moving from, 5 to 8 within 12 months, just in front of a potential general election, I think is a time where you could see some changes. And so I think the adequacy conversation should not go off the agenda, but it might be we just can't answer or put enough time into that because we do need to see further output. I think you have got to look at the groups that are excluded and go through a process within the current legislation as could it be simplified? Does it make sense to exclude lower paid? Does it make sense to exclude self-employed? And what might solutions be? I think it would be sensible to at least ask those questions and see if there are alternate solutions out there.
Morten, what's your view of when we should have a conversation about contribution rates and indeed make a recommendation?
I think we really need to have that started. It's taking us over 10 years to get to where we are now, where we are a quarter of the employers have been auto-enrolled or gone through the process, and a little more than half of the members have been enrolled. We've excluded millions of people from auto-enrollment. 75% of those or more are women. So we have all these things that are not where we have quite far to go. If we look at the contribution rates, we are now at 2% 10 years after. For a person earning £10,000 a year, that's actually only 0.84% of their earnings. That's nothing. And if you are earning average salaries, that's 1.5%. So it really needs to be looked at, in my view. And I think it needs to be, again, a very long vision with a target of where we need to go to, and then slowly getting to that point. Because I agree with Patrick. It's very steep increases we're going through now, and it would be a lot easier for both employees and their employers to have gradual increases and be able to plan for that. So I think it's urgent that we have that debate.
Emma, I'm interested in your thoughts on what should be included, and also on what you think might happen to opt-out rates as the contribution rates rise.
Yeah, because I think one of the problems of having the review in 2017 is, of course, we won't have any of that evidence, Joe. So, you know, I remember at the time, 2017, yeah, that's ages away, and now it's next year, and, you know, we just haven't got all of the information that I think we're going to need to prove whether you increase the automatic enrolment and people opt out more.
Aren't we going to be left with the same problem that people aren't saving enough? We've got to make a decision about this, and delaying it will mean that there's another, as Morten said, it's 10 years.
It is 10 years, so we have to go ahead with it. It's just we haven't got all of that information. I mean, I'm quite positive. I think that if presented in the right way, you know, we can definitely, you know, keep people in pension schemes. We've got them in. Yes, it will be a little bit frightening to see what happens as that money becomes more real as a deduction from pay. But I really do believe that with the right communication, some strong messages, we can keep people in as we see, you know, those contributions escalating. But we just don't have that evidence as yet to really prove that. Certainly not in the UK. There is some evidence that, you know, we can look at in the US, other markets, that is quite helpful, that proves that actually, you know, in DC, apathy rules, and you will stay in and people will save more tomorrow.
Otto, I can see you nodding while Emma was making her comments. Do you agree?
Well, actually, I was trying to work out whether it was me that was making those terrible noises, because it wasn't deliberate, just to be clear. But you know, I'm just not so sure. I suppose maybe it's because I'm the oldest person sitting on this bench. We've achieved a lot. We are achieving a lot. We've still got a lot to do. I mean, everybody knows that there's still a lot of staging to do. There's still a lot of employers to bring in. And then the phasing issue is going to be, as Emma says, a rich source of data in terms of understanding how people really feel about all of this. And we shouldn't forget that the whole pension reform piece was built on a pretty solid consensual foundation where not only cross-party in government, but actually employers and representatives of employees and others came together to say this is the right thing to do. So, you know, I'm as strongly with my colleagues here on the need to improve levels of contribution as soon as we feel it's safe to do so. I suppose I'm a little bit more patient in terms of taking some of those steps once I've got a bit more to go on and making sure that I've had a proper discussion with all those people who have to support this programme. Because the thing that I would worry more about is that we knock off course the general direction, because this has been hard won, the ground we're on now. We don't want to lose it. But where I'm totally with the panel is on bringing more people in. How can the self-employed, for example, which is still for me a huge
How could you do that?
part.
How can automatic enrolment adapt, particularly to the pressing problem of the gig economy? People who are
absolutely,
you know, in
absolutely.
insecure work. There's growing numbers who just aren't even going to come
Absolutely.
anywhere near automatic.
Well, and you won't be surprised that I don't have the answer. But where I think where the answer might lie is giving ourselves a bit of time. So saying, okay, let's take a view that maybe 3 years from now or 5 years from now, there will be another phase of development around this programme. Understanding where the technology might be by then. You know, I mean, the movement in the last 10 years in terms of how people communicate with each other and engage with each other, and how that could change over the next 10 years, it doesn't take a genius to work out how much different that could be. Somewhere in there could be the basis on which we start to get people involved easily in making contributions to their long-term financial resilience. And it's the creativity that we can bring together through all our experiences to try and populate some of those ideas with government and others, I think, which might prove the answer.
One other issue on the horizon which could impact on automatic enrolment is the lifetime ISA. There's lots of views around about how that might impact, you know, young savers particularly. I'm interested in your views on whether young people might be tempted out of saving in automatic enrolment into saving into a lifetime ISA. What's your view?
It could be a product, and certainly for the purpose of house buying, which is obviously one of the biggest demands that particularly young people face in their life. It could be that this opportunity will see growing products coming from that, and that, you know, that more people will participate. I think the problem for us as an industry, it provides such confusion as to what is the future. You know, where does this sit within the savings landscape? How do we, I mean, at very base level, how do we as providers invest in the right space to ensure we can meet the needs of the market? You know, and some of what's coming out around that is potentially a threat to auto-enrolment. You know, we are only partway through, and so I think that confusion is not helping the situation at the moment.
Is that shared pretty much?
And I think also the communication we have seen from Treasury on this is still confusing it, because as a pension product, and I think somehow if I look at the product features of the LISA, I think it will be aimed at a demographic that would probably save already, and so I can't see it's actually supporting that overall policy of making sure that people are better provided for in their retirement.
I mean, if I talk for the membership of the Nest scheme, I'm less worried, frankly, because I think their level of awareness of what it is, their level of awareness of the extent to which they're part of a pension savings system at the moment is pretty low, because they've been brought in through inertia. And actually their appetite or their ability to think about home ownership at the moment, you know, if you look at debt and you look at the challenges that normal people have in terms of managing their budgets, and you look at the difficulty of getting on the housing ladder for many, many people, to a certain extent, I'm with Morten, it's a bit of a specialist subject, the LISA. So although I think it does confuse, and I think it does raise the question, wouldn't it be good to have a more coherent approach to long-term saving and provision, I'm less worried about the immediate impact, frankly, because I think it's kind of off the radar screen.
So there are calls for employers to be barred from paying into a LISA on behalf of staff. Is that going too far?
I think that might be going too far. I think it's great if it's additive. I worry if it's being used as an alternative. But
should it be monitored?
But you can't really. Yeah, I think you monitor this. I mean, I'm kind of with the panel, and I think it will be a relatively slow burn. You look at the take-up of workplace ISAs sold through the employer, it's actually pretty low. So, we might be making too much of this, and a lot of employees are, younger employees, that they don't want to save in a pension because they want to save for a house. That's much more important to them. They want to have to stop paying rent the whole time. So potentially having something that actually answers a need is a good thing. So, I'm positive that we can accommodate it, but we've just got to be careful and look to see that people aren't opting out, losing their employer contribution, and being, sort of putting all their money, because they might not be able to do both, into the LISA.
So we've got about 4 minutes before we open the floor to questions, and it's come to the role of Nest, Otto. The spotlight's on you. So you're recently launched the blueprint. You want to expand your remit from a workplace pension provider to move into the drawdown market. So what are you hoping to achieve?
And how many minutes have I got, or how many hours
Well,
have I
just
got?
very quickly.
I do have a speech I
the
prepared earlier.
point, I just want to make
on the retirement solutions piece.
Just one point. I mean, it's going to be a long time. It could be decades before this would be of any use to your members in terms of their pot size. So I'm interested in why you're seeking to have this flexibility in expanding your remit now.
Well, there's two very simple answers to that, I would say. The first one is that we were set up to provide pensions for people. That's what's written into our Nest order and all the rest. And we did that through a panel of annuity providers. Clearly, freedom and choice meant that the panel of annuity providers wasn't the right solution anymore. So what we're seeking to do is to put a sustainable and 21st century solution in place for our members. And I think your point about it's going to be decades before this is relevant, actually, no, it's not decades, because I think there's a misconception in the way people think about this. People think about people on modest earnings with modest pot sizes taking cash because that's what they want to do, and it's because they want to have cash. I think actually most people are taking cash because they don't see the availability of an income-providing solution that works for them, and they think, well, if I take the cash, I'll find a way to turn that use that as a regular income, And as I was thinking about this coming up on the train, it's like when I was earning as an employee, giving me my annual salary at the beginning of the year and saying, now you just make sure you use that well throughout the whole year, I wouldn't want that responsibility. And I think people want to be able to have a solution that fits their income needs, and measured against the state pension, because that's what I measure against for most of my members, it's actually quite a modest pot size that can make a big difference.
Okay, so Nest is changing its role to adapt to what its members want. Final views from
I think for me it's a surprising both the timing of this, because the demand isn't there, and if you to your example, Otto, I think your members have about £275 in their pots in average, which is very similar to our members. All they can get is cash for a very long time. So I don't think there is that demand for it, and I also think it's quite surprising in the consultation in itself that there's no mention of any competition issues that might arise from this, because this is Nest is set up with under state aid rules and with tax money to do a very specific task, and this is moving outside that. And you could say, in hindsight, everyone when Nest was conceived and auto-enrollment was thought about, everyone thought that there would be no providers in the market, and now we're talking here about it being overcrowded. So I think it's way too early to decide how the retirement market will be and what products will be available. And I think Nest has a super good opportunity with its size to leverage that bargaining power.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add before I give Otto an opportunity to respond, and then I'll open the floor just very briefly?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very similar to Morten's view. I think, our books of business are very, very similar. They have subtle differences, pretty similar. We don't see the demand for what would be quite an expensive bill to put in place. But I think it's more a market failure issue for me. Nest's primary reason for being was to come into the market where that failure had been established, that automatic enrolment would not be successful, and they would come in and shoulder and do the heavy lifting, and they've done a brilliant job at that. But as soon as you move outside of that changes your fundamental reason for being. So actually the question we should be asking is whether that needs to change, not whether I could do this product or that product. I think it feels like scope creep by the back door, and I think for the sector itself, it's a concern. So, those questions need to be answered.
Hope we're not feeling ganged up over there.
I'm on the end of the panel here for a very good reason. It's very easy to walk off.
Just for now, certainly
Just
our
very
experience
briefly,
is people are taking cash and they are spending it. Otto, they're using it to pay off debts. They're using it to buy a conservatory. So it isn't really being designed for long-term income right now. That's very...
30 seconds to defend.
30 seconds, Joe. Well, I mean, I think a few observations. First, the whole concept of drawdown and drawdown-like products, and I saw some tweets on this today actually coming out of this conference, rely on, the retail products at least, rely on regular interaction with intermediaries and advisors who can support you in making sure your decision is still the right decision. And for my membership, that's not affordable and is not going to make sense economically. I think the second thing is I go back to our purpose. Our purpose is to provide pensions. And at the moment, I can't explain to my membership how I'm going to offer them a pension solution that's going to make sense for them. And the final point, it's one thing to talk about the market as it is now. Most of the people retiring now are not representative of the DC generation that we are all bringing in through auto-enrolment. The needs of people in 5 years' time and 10 years' time are going to be quite different from the people who are retiring now. And you can't build one of these things, assemble one of these things overnight. It takes time to work it through.
Thank you very much. Well done there. Hope you didn't feel ganged up on. We've got time for a couple of questions. Excellent. There's a few I can see. The lights are on. There's a couple on this side over here. We'll get the mic. If you could just identify yourself first. Just very briefly, we've got a couple of minutes.
David Rowley, freelance journalist. I saw the presentation this morning on the DB task force, and it was quite alarming and depressing picture. And you seem to have focused on problems here for the Master Trust, but in 5 and 10 years' time, based on what I saw from my time in Australia, you're going to be giants. You're going to be hiring the best talent in the industry, and you're going to be returning a lot of value to members through your scale. Can anyone talk about that? Because that is a really exciting story.
Just very briefly, we could just a couple
No,
of...
I completely agree with you. I mean, I think the discussion has been significantly about reputational risk for pension reform and what can we do to try and mitigate that undermining the momentum that there is in the system. But it has had it could have been a very different discussion we could have had. We could have had a discussion about how much progress has been made and where this could go. And I completely agree with you. I think the potential for the Master Trust community to start delivering real economies of scale and significant enhancement in terms of quality and value to its membership is huge.
Yeah, I'd agree with you as well, David, fairly obviously, but I think we could easily have broadened this discussion beyond auto-enrolment and look at the benefits of independent governance, why actually quite a lot of larger schemes are now moving into master trusts from own trust arrangements or even from GPPs that they may have set up many years ago. So I think there really is a very positive aura around master trusts at the moment. We just don't want that disturbed by industry disruption. So I think that's why the focus was on that.
I might just, if I can just hold it here and just take one more question and then we can
Okay.
get to answer.
Yeah.
That's all right. Sorry, we've only got a minute left. Was there one more question?
Thank you. It's Alistair McQueen from Aviva. Yesterday, the Pensions Minister did not voice support for compulsion, and he did not voice support for a second pension commission. Maybe a yes/no answer. Do you agree with him?
Okay, we could go through the panel. That'd be a nice way to end up the panel discussion.
So the answer yes would mean I agree with him, I think. So I agree with him. Yes.
On both counts.
Yes.
Emma.
I agree with him that we probably don't need compulsion as it is at the moment, but I would like to see an independent pension commission.
And I would agree with that also. But I think to avoid compulsion, we need to see what happens when the contribution rates increase and how can we make that work better. And all the research we do shows that if we can increase the employer contribution so that's a little higher, that will help a lot on that.
Yeah, and again, I don't see a need for compulsion at the moment, but I do think there are a lot of interesting initiatives going on within the industry at the moment, which are a ripple from, you know, transparency. You've got dashboard going on. You've got a number of things. I think what we do need, whether it's a commission or something else, we do need someone to set a longer term plan out and work out how these individual pieces work better together, because there are some really good things going on, but we might miss the opportunity of their true benefits if we don't start to piece that landscape better.
So not much appetite at all for compulsion, but I'm sure there's appetite out there for lunch, which neatly brings us to a close for this panel session. I think it's been a brilliant discussion, so thank you very much to all our panellists today for sharing your thoughts, and for the audience for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're very